Everything you have been told about wealth and divine favor is wrong. Your bank account proves it. You have been sitting in church pews, praying for breakthroughs, waiting for God to drop $1 million into your lap while your credit score sits at 500 and your savings account has $17 in it. Meanwhile, someone who never stepped foot in a temple is buying their third rental property. This is not about faith. This is about biology. And today, I am going to show you why God is not coming to make you rich, but your prefrontal cortex can. Let me be very clear from the beginning. I am not here to attack your beliefs. I am here to attack the lie that has been keeping you poor. The lie that wealth is a blessing that falls from the sky onto the chosen ones. The lie that if you just believe hard enough, pray loud enough, manifest intensely enough, the universe will rearrange itself to put zeros in your bank account. That is not how reality works. That is not how your brain works. And that is definitely not how money works. Here is what actually happens inside your skull when you wait for divine intervention instead of taking biological action. Your brain has a system, we call it the mesolimbic pathway, that runs on a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is not the pleasure molecule, despite what every oversimplified article tells you. Dopamine is the anticipation molecule. It is the craving mechanism. It fires when you expect a reward. And here is where it gets dangerous. When you sit in that church service and the preacher tells you that God is about to make you the first millionaire in your family, your dopamine system lights up like a Christmas tree. You feel it, that surge of hope, that tingling possibility. Your brain just got a hit of anticipation without any action required. This is identical to what happens in a gambling addict's brain when they pull a slot machine lever. Same circuit, same chemical, same delusion. Your ancestors did not survive the savannah by waiting for antelopes to walk into their caves. They survived by understanding patterns, predicting outcomes, and taking calculated action. The humans who sat around waiting for divine intervention to feed them died. Their genes did not make it to you. You are the descendant of the ones who moved, who hunted, who built, who figured out how to turn effort into resources. But somewhere in the last few thousand years, we wrapped this survival mechanism in religious language and called it faith. We turned action into passivity. We turned biology into theology. Let me take you back 200,000 years. You are a human on the African savanna. Your tribe has two types of people. Type A sees a tree full of fruit and climbs it. Type B sees the same tree and prays for the fruit to fall. Which one survives? Which one passes their genes forward? Evolution does not care about your belief system. It cares about resource acquisition. The humans who develop the capacity to delay gratification, to plan, to execute complex sequences of action, those are the ones who built surplus. Those are the ones who accumulated resources. Those are the ones whose DNA you carry right now. But here is the evolutionary mismatch that is destroying your financial future. Your brain still runs on software designed for immediate survival. When resources are scarce, and they were always scarce for 99% of human history, your brain goes into what researchers call scarcity mode. Sendil Mullainathan at Harvard spent years studying this. When your brain detects scarcity, it narrows your focus to immediate problems. It tanks your executive function. It makes long-term planning nearly impossible. You cannot think your way out of poverty when your brain is in survival mode. This is not a moral failing. This is biological design. And this is where the religious wealth narrative becomes actively harmful. When you are told that God will provide, your brain interprets this as permission to stop planning. Why would you need to develop a budget when divine intervention is coming? Why would you need to learn about compound interest when a miracle is scheduled for next month? Your dopamine system keeps firing on the anticipation, but no actual reward ever arrives. You know what happens when dopamine fires repeatedly without actual reward delivery? Your brain adapts. It downregulates the receptors. You need bigger and bigger promises to feel that same hope. Bigger prophecies, louder declarations, more intense manifestations. You are not building faith. You are building a tolerance to false hope. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford has spent 40 years studying stress and behavior in primates. One of his core findings destroys the entire prosperity gospel framework. Sapolsky found that the primates at the bottom of social hierarchies, the ones with the least resources and the most stress, do not lack motivation or faith. They lack control. When you remove agency, when you tell an organism that forces beyond their control determine their outcomes, their stress hormone cortisol goes through the roof. Chronic cortisol exposure shrinks the hippocampus, impairs memory formation, and most critically for our conversation, it damages the prefrontal cortex. That is the CEO of your brain. That is where planning happens. That is where you build wealth, and it shuts down under chronic stress. So when the preacher tells you to just have faith while your electricity is about to be shut off, your cortisol is flooding your system, your prefrontal cortex is going offline, and your capacity to make the rational decisions necessary to build wealth is evaporating in real time. This is not empowering. This is neurological sabotage dressed up as spiritual advice. Let me pause here for a second and ask you a question that maybe no one has ever asked you. What is the worst part of living with this internal struggle? Not what you tell people, but the part you carry in silence. I want you to know something. What you are feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people are watching this video right now carrying exactly the same weight. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling me what is the hardest part for you. Your honesty might make someone else feel less alone today. Now let me continue showing you how to break this pattern. The first thing you need to understand about building wealth is that it is not a spiritual problem. It is a behavioral problem with neurological roots. Every single person who has built sustainable wealth, religious or not, followed the same biological protocol. They trained their prefrontal cortex to override their limbic system. That is it. That is the entire secret. Everything else is decoration. Your limbic system is ancient. It is the emotional brain. It wants immediate rewards. It wants to spend that $100 on something that feels good right now, because for 99% of human history, tomorrow was not guaranteed. If you found surplus calories, you ate them immediately because storage was unreliable and theft was constant. That impulse is still running in your brain. Every time you see something you want, your limbic system screams, "Buy it now." Every time you get paid, it screams, "Spend it now." This is not weakness. This is evolution. Your prefrontal cortex is new, maybe 200,000 years old. It can think about next year. It can model future scenarios. It can override impulse. But here is the problem. It is slow. It burns a lot of glucose. And it only works when it is properly trained. Most people have an executive function system that is about as developed as an atrophied muscle because they have spent their entire lives letting their limbic system drive. Building wealth requires you to essentially go to war with 200,000 years of evolutionary programming, and you cannot win that war with willpower. Willpower is a limited resource. Researchers like Roy Baumeister have shown this repeatedly. Every decision you make depletes a finite pool of self-control. By the end of the day, when you are tired and stressed, your prefrontal cortex taps out and your limbic system takes over. That is why you can plan a perfect budget on Sunday morning and blow it on impulse purchases by Tuesday night. This is not a character flaw. This is biological depletion. So if willpower does not work, what does? You need to change your environment. You need to build what researchers call commitment devices. These are tools that make the right decision automatic and the wrong decision difficult. Ancient Odysseus knew this when he had his crew tie him to the mast so he could hear the sirens without steering into the rocks. He did not trust his willpower. He trusted his engineering. Here is how this applies to money. If you get paid and that money sits in your checking account, your limbic system will find a way to spend it. The friction is too low. The temptation is too high. You need to automate the transfer of money from checking to savings the moment your paycheck deposits. Not when you remember. Not when you feel motivated. The instant the money arrives. Automation removes willpower from the equation. You are engineering around your biology instead of fighting it. But here is where most people fail even with automation. They save a tiny amount, maybe 5%, because they are afraid of scarcity. They think they need that money available just in case. And sometimes they do, but more often, What they really need is to understand something that will change everything. You do not have a scarcity problem. You have a prioritization problem. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote about this 2,000 years ago in his letters on wealth. He said, and I am paraphrasing, that no person is poor who has enough. The question is not how much you have. The question is what you have decided is enough. Your brain, running on that ancient Savannah software, will always tell you that enough is slightly more than you have right now. This is the hedonic treadmill. You get a raise, you feel good for 2 weeks, then your baseline adjusts and you want more. This mechanism kept your ancestors alive by preventing complacency. But in modern consumer culture, it keeps you broke by constantly raising your standard of enough. You need to consciously define enough and then engineer your life around that definition. This requires something extremely difficult. It requires you to say no to your own limbic system over and over again until the prefrontal cortex pathway becomes stronger. Neuroplasticity is real. You can rewire the hardware, but it requires the same thing building muscle requires. Repeated stress under progressive load. Start here. Pick one category of spending that your limbic system controls. For most people, this is food, eating out, delivery apps, impulse grocery runs. Your brain has been conditioned to hit a dopamine button every time you feel stress or boredom. Food is the button. Every time you interrupt that pattern, every time you feel the urge and consciously choose not to act on it, you are building prefrontal cortex strength. You are literally changing your brain structure. But you cannot just remove the reward. Your brain needs to understand that delayed gratification leads to bigger rewards. This is where you need to make the invisible visible. Open a separate savings account. Name it something specific. Not savings, not emergency fund. Name it the first brick. Every time you choose not to hit that dopamine button, transfer the money you would have spent into that account. $10, $20, $40. Watch the number grow. Your brain needs to see the accumulation. It needs tangible proof that the sacrifice is building something. This is what compound interest really is at the neurological level. It is not just money growing. It is proof that delayed gratification works. And every time your brain sees proof, it strengthens the pathway that made the choice possible. After about 90 days of this, something remarkable happens. The choice gets easier. Not because you have more willpower, but because you have built a stronger circuit. The prefrontal cortex response time gets faster. The limbic impulse gets quieter. You are not fighting your biology anymore. You are leveraging neuroplasticity. Now let me address the scarcity trap directly, because this is where most people get stuck. They say, I cannot save because I barely have enough to survive. And sometimes that is true. Actual poverty is real, and it is brutal, and it does constrain choices. But more often than people want to admit, what they call barely surviving includes expenses that are optional. $150 a month streaming and subscription stack, $200 a month on coffee and energy drinks, $300 a month on impulse purchases that do not get used, $500 a month on a car payment for a vehicle that is more status signal than transportation. I am not judging these choices. I am identifying them as choices. Your brain does not want you to see them as choices because that creates cognitive dissonance. It is easier to believe you have no options than to admit you are choosing comfort over future security. But here is the biological reality. Every dollar you spend on immediate comfort is a dollar your future self will pay interest on, either literally through credit card debt or figuratively through missed opportunity. Time is the most valuable component in wealth building, and you are burning it every month you delay. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was talking about a specific form of cognitive reframing that modern psychology now calls stress-related growth. When you face an obstacle, you have two choices. You can interpret it as evidence that you are a victim of circumstances, which triggers helplessness and cortisol flooding. Or you can interpret it as a problem to be solved, which activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces stress response. Same obstacle. Different interpretation, completely different neurological outcome. The fact that you were born into a family without wealth is not evidence that you are cursed. It is not proof that God has forgotten you. It is simply an initial condition, and initial conditions can be changed through sustained action over time. This is not motivational speaking. This is thermodynamics. You are a biological system that can take in energy and organize it toward a goal. That capacity is not distributed by divine lottery. It is built through practice. Here is the protocol. I am going to give you the exact steps because vague inspiration is useless. You need engineering. Step 1. Calculate your true discretionary spending. Track every single expense for 30 days. Not to judge yourself, but to see reality. Most people are shocked when they see the actual numbers. Your brain hides spending from you because acknowledging it creates guilt, and guilt is uncomfortable. Make it visible. Use an app. Use a spreadsheet. Use a notebook. The tool does not matter. The awareness does. Step 2. Identify the 3 highest categories of discretionary spending. These are almost always food, entertainment, and transportation. Pick one category, just one. Commit to reducing it by 20% for the next 90 days. Not 50%. Not cold turkey elimination. 20% reduction. This is critical. If you try to change too much too fast, your limbic system will rebel and you will snap back harder than before. Sustainable change happens at the edge of discomfort, not in the middle of suffering. Step 3. Automate the savings from that reduction. If you cut $40 a week from eating out, set up an automatic transfer of $40 per week into your separate savings account. The transfer happens on the same day every week. Same time. No decisions. No willpower required. You are building a machine that runs without you. Step 4. Do not touch that money for 90 days. I do not care if you want something. I do not care if there is a sale. I do not care if your friends are going somewhere and you feel left out. 90 days. This is not about the money amount. This is about training your prefrontal cortex to tolerate delayed gratification. You are teaching your brain that you can set a goal and execute it despite discomfort. This is the foundation of every future financial decision you will ever make. Step 5. At the end of 90 days, evaluate. Look at the number in that account. For most people who follow this protocol, it will be somewhere between $500 and $1,500, maybe more. Now, here is what you do not do. You do not spend it. You do not reward yourself. You take that proof that the system works and you extend the timeline. You commit to 6 more months. Same process. But now you add a second category of spending to optimize. You are building momentum. You are compounding behavior change. After 1 year of this protocol, 3 things will have changed. 1, you will have actual savings, probably somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000 depending on your income. 2, your brain will have rewired. The choice to save will feel less like deprivation and more like building. 3, and this is the most important, you will have destroyed the belief that external forces control your financial future. You will have tangible, measurable proof that your actions create outcomes. That is psychological capital, and it is worth more than the cash in the account. Now let me talk about the $1 million timeline because the title of this video made a promise. If you are starting from zero and you follow this protocol, you will not be a millionaire next year. You will not be a millionaire in 5 years. You might not be a millionaire in 20 years depending on your income level, but here is what you will be. You will be the person in your family who broke the pattern. You will be the one who proved that poverty is not genetic. You will be the one who built the foundation that your children can build on. Generational wealth is not built in 1 generation. It is built across 3 or 4 generations of people who refuse to believe that biology is destiny. Sapolsky has this line I think about constantly. He says, biology is not destiny, but it sure loads the dice. You were born with certain constraints, certain starting conditions, certain neurological patterns inherited from parents who were stressed and under-resourced. But here is the thing about loaded dice. If you understand the probabilities, you can adjust your strategy. You cannot change the dice, but you can change how you play the game. The people who build wealth are not smarter than you. They are not more disciplined than you. They do not have better DNA or divine favor. What they have is a prefrontal cortex that has been trained through thousands of small decisions to override the limbic system, and that training is available to anyone willing to do the uncomfortable work of rewiring their hardware. Seneca wrote that wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. This is not some ancient wisdom that does not apply to modern capitalism. This is neuroscience. Your wants are generated by the same dopamine system that kept your ancestors chasing the next meal. In a world of artificial abundance and engineered addiction, that system will bankrupt you if you do not consciously regulate it. The person who learns to control their dopamine system is the person who builds wealth. The person who lets their dopamine system control them is the person who stays in debt. Here is the final piece. The reason this video is called God is about to make you the first millionaire in your family. I used that title intentionally. I used it because that is the language that keeps people trapped. That phrase implies passivity. It implies external locus of control. It implies that wealth is something that happens to you rather than something you build. And I wanted you to click on this video expecting a message about faith, and instead receive a message about biology. Because if you are still watching at this point, you are already different than most people. Most people would have clicked away the moment I challenged their belief system. But you stayed. And that tells me something important about your prefrontal cortex. It is curious. It is willing to update. It is capable of changing its mind when presented with new information. That capacity is more valuable than any inheritance you did not receive. You are not waiting for God to make you rich. You are becoming the person who understands that wealth is built through thousands of small biological decisions compounded over time. You are becoming the person who knows that your brain is a machine that can be programmed. You are becoming the person who breaks the generational pattern not through divine intervention, but through disciplined neuroplasticity. If you made it this far, I already know something important about you. You do not just want to survive your own mind, you want to master it. This channel is not about magic promises. It is about real people sharing real tools that work in the real world. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I am asking, but because you deserve a place where you can learn to build the version of yourself you always knew was in there. Biology is destiny until you hack it. This content is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not financial advice. It is not a replacement for professional consultation with qualified advisors. The concepts discussed are based on research in neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and behavioral economics, but individual circumstances vary. Always consult with licensed professionals before making significant financial decisions. The biological determinism framework presented here is one lens for understanding human behavior, not a complete theory of human agency. This is a work of educational fiction designed to provoke thought and encourage evidence-based